when you decide to make a sequel now at this particular point of of the culture, what did you feel had kind of changed in the interim, particularly as the film itself? There's no time for change at all. We just go straight from number one to number two. But in the interim, so much has happened.
Well, I mean, it's true, and I actually got fairly depressed about it because when we did the first film, there were only two active franchises, and one was Spider-Man and the other one was X-Men. And, Batman, it was post-Nipplegate, and Chris Nolan hadn't done his thing yet. And so we kind of had some elbow room. And now if you throw a rock, you'll hit 7 superheroes, And so I got really depressed for a little bit because I thought, it's saturated now. By the time this movie comes out, people are going to be sick of superheroes. And then I thought, wait a minute, that isn't why I got into the idea in the first place. What I got into, what made me excited about the idea was that it was really a film about a family and through the lens of a superhero rather than about superheroes. And then it became interesting to me again because family is sort of an infinite thing. I mean, as long as there has been storytelling and as long as there will be storytelling, that'll be a really fertile ground. So there was plenty left to do in that instance. And one of the epiphanies of the first film was that when I was picking the powers for the characters, every power had been done, you know what I mean? So I thought, well, I'll do it based on their position in the family. And so dads are expected to be strong, so you make him super strong. Moms are pulled in 12 directions at once, so she stretches. Teenagers are insecure and defensive, so she has force fields and invisibility. And 10-year-olds are energy balls, and babies are unknowns, right? They could have all the powers, they could have none of the powers. So that kind of grounds it. It's using the powers as a way to comment on roles and times of your life. And I think that was one of the things that worked about the movie is somebody can relate to at least 2 of the family characters. You know what I mean? I mean, I know what it's like to be the annoying kid brother, and I know what it's like to be the bumbling dad, and I was a teenager, so I was insecure, and so there are more ways in, and that's what made it interesting to me.
Did knowing that there was an enormous audience already
it totally excites you because you just think, not what I expected. I mean, there were, the Twitterverse, they better grow up and be really edgy or I'm not in, I mean, it's just like, I think that if you think about it that way, you just want to curl up into a ball and never make anything. But if you just can turn down that yammering thing and just say, what would I like to see, then it becomes an easier question to answer.
Mm-hmm. And I should say there was a huge group at Pixar who had made the first film with Brad who were really excited to come in and get at it again. So I think we were able to sort of put up the wall and build the moat around the studio and dive into this thing that we had loved making 14 years ago. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's also on the first film, there were different dragons to slay. I mean, animation, and Steve Jobs actually kind of picked on this. When you put animation with superheroes, it equaled cheap in a lot of people's minds because, the only big budget thing that had been done were, live action films like Superman and the Batman movie and then Spider-Man and. But animation had always been like cheap sort of Saturday morning, done for $1.98 kind of stuff. And I had to point out to Steve that actually the first superhero on film was animated Superman from the Fleischer brothers, and they were big budget. I mean, they weren't cheap. They were done really well. And but he was concerned that people would hear animation and superhero and think cheap. And so we had to kind of, plant that idea that we were going to do this as well as we could, And we didn't have, nobody knew our superheroes. They were made for the movies. They didn't have any other life. So There were things that made people nervous, and one of the nice things about sequels is people aren't nervous about them anymore in the same way. Originals make people nervous,
Nicole, what were the kind of sticking points that you found as a producer that people, were there any questions people raised to say, should we be doing this, should we be doing that? Because I think the core of this film, it's, compared to the first Incredibles, it's a much freer film. You've got these moments of observational comedy, you've got this kind of out and out Looney Tunes style slapstick, and sequences where characters kind of sit down and pour themselves a Negroni and talk about the nature of heroism. It's kind of quite out there stuff compared to.
Says animation all over.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. Two people sitting down and talking about heroism. Yeah.
But I mean, did you find people saying, okay, so let's maybe steer it in this direction, or how did you reconcile
No,
that?
I mean, the studio embraced the idea of Incredibles 2 because there had been this drumbeat in the world for so long for Incredibles 2, Incredibles 2, Incredibles 2, when are you going to make it, and had been very patient, actually, until Brad was ready to come back and finish the other projects he was going to do. Our problem was that they changed the release date on us. They moved it up by a year. And so we lost a year of writing. And so suddenly Brad was writing
failing.
and directing at the same time. And we were taking pages, off of his desk and putting them into production out of sequence. So we didn't really have the entire script understood until we were almost
after the
done.
release, yeah. We waited for other people to tell us what it was about. Yeah.
And sometimes that's the best way to make something, Just don't look down too hard. Just keep making it, and when you look up, it's going to mean something.
Yeah.
Deadlines are an amazing thing.
Yeah, no, it was really hard. But we had some other things that were done. Iron Giant was done quickly. And so television had kind of prepared me for the kind of MASH unit, school of filmmaking, where you just like do something and then triage it as quickly as possible,
In terms of the animation, it's really interesting that you bring up the Fleischer Brothers cartoons, because they have this really kind of vivid modernist look, and in the first Incredibles film, that's exactly the aesthetic you go for, but then possibly because, I don't know, the technology then, it lent itself to those big angles and simplified outlines and hyper-readable poses. Was there a temptation to move to a different kind of style with the sequel, or were you absolutely dead set, even though there's been this kind of enormous advance in what you can do?
I think that that's the challenge you have when you return to something is, technology has changed, but you want it to feel like it's connected. The difference was that we got to do stuff the way we were trying to do it in the first one, in this one. And, the first movie was a little more, jungle. It was a little more rural, and this movie was a little more urban, And it was more focused on the female point of view, so it was different.
Still pleased to see.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, right, yes, the mic.
Yes.
And even with like Edna Mode's topiary on the drive up to the house, it's still cubic, but it's
right.
You
Well, no time has elapsed. I mean, that that ended up being, I thought, a kind of a weird decision. It was sort of screw you time. We're going to start it 5 seconds after the movie ended, even though 14 years have gone by.
It was wonderful for production when we were going in a hurry. We knew exactly what we were going to work with in terms of sets. Except for the new sets, we could quickly rebuild the old sets while we were figuring out what would happen in them.
But we had to make them a lot better because the technology was better.
Tell me then about these new...
Better, sorry.
Tell me about these new urban sets then, the incredibly complex cityscape, and again, the staging of this monorail chase through the middle of it. What were the visual references for that, the touchstones? I mean, was this kind of...
Well, it was mainly just, you wanted it to feel like they were traveling far. So you wanted to be in the city, then go out of the city, be in the country, and then be entering another city. And so that it felt like they were traveling a far distance in a short period of time. So it was, it's kind of what you do in animation. You try to boil it down to the essence and then heighten that, And but it was a challenge to do it at the speed that it needed to be done and still be coherent, And also, there's there's an added thing in animation where people are conditioned to think that people are always going to be fine. You know, that Coyote falls off the cliff and just dusts himself off and he's ready to go again. So jeopardy becomes very hard to do in feature animation because everybody's used to people just pounding the crap out of each other and nothing ever happening. So, you know, I tried to engineer in flaws and things that hurt and you know, mistakes. And so that she's not doing everything perfect all the time, that she's, you know, the motorcycle is colliding with the side of a car a little bit. She doesn't judge everything perfectly. And because you can control everything in animation, people like to make it perfect. And so everybody always hits the bullseye when they aim at it. And I always think that's a mistake, you know, because it makes it not connect with what you know to be real, even if what you're doing is fantastical and impossible. If you add in flaws and you add in mistakes, you know, it makes it more visceral.
And this is the kind of thing I think an audience doesn't necessarily consciously register while they're watching the film.
No, but they
goes
can
in
feel
somehow,
it.
right?
And, you know, if you turn around and watch them and they're gripping you know, you've done your job. And that's hard to do in animation because, like I said, there's a lot of conditioning from animation that nobody's ever in danger, nobody can ever get hurt, nobody can ever die, blah, blah, blah.